Hi, and welcome back to day 2 of the Archer video sew-along. Yesterday we talked about the Archer, gave you tips for choosing your fabric, and also went through the list of supplies you'll need to complete your own shirt. Today we'll be discussing how to choose a size, as well as running through some common pattern adjustments for the Archer button-up. There's unfortunately no way that I can possibly get every adjustment into this video, so I'm sorry if there's a specific adjustment that you wanted to see that I haven't included. One of the most important things you can do to start any new garment off on the right foot is to take accurate measurements and properly choose a size. The 3 basic body measurements needed to select your size are bust, waist, and hip. The Archer has a straight fit through the waist, so the most important measurements are going to be your bust and your hip. Generally, I like to have someone else take my measurements so I'm not twisting and bending while I take them, but it's not a big deal if you can't find another sewer to do so. The bust measurement refers to the full bust. For this measurement, you're going to measure around the fullest point of your bust, wearing whatever type of bra or undergarment you plan on wearing under your finished garment. So you just take your tape measure and go right around. Make sure the measuring tape is parallel to the floor and taut, but not tight. You want to make sure you're still able to breathe. The waist measurement will be at your natural waist. On many people, this is the smallest point of your torso, but that completely depends on your body shape. If you fall into my category of being a square, a good rule of thumb is that your waist is generally where your hands want to end up if you put your hands on your waist. It's also where you bend from, if that makes sense. So you'll take your tape measure. You won't be wearing an Archer when you do this. And you'll put it around your waist and you'll take note. The hip measurement will be the fullest part of your hips and butt. Typically, this is approximately 7 inches below your natural waist, though it can be higher or lower depending on your body. Wherever it falls, you want to make sure you get around the full circumference no matter what, so that way you don't end up with a garment that's too tight in the hips. So you just place the tape measure around the fullest part. I like to stand with my feet slightly apart, not all the way apart, not together, and then take that measurement and note it. Once you get your measurements, it's time to select your size on the size chart. If your measurement falls between 2 sizes, for instance, if your bust is 35.5, you'll want to round up and choose the next size. If you fall into different sizes for each measurement, as I do, you can either go with a straight size of the largest measurement or blend between sizes to get a better fit. There are a few things to think about in this situation. As I mentioned previously, the waist is the least important measurement, so if that's the largest garment size you fall into, I'd recommend checking the finished measurements for that size. If your waist is inside that, then go with the larger size of your hip or bust. If your measurements are more than a size apart for bust and hip, you'll likely want to blend to avoid having one section of the shirt too tight or too loose. That situation is really never that great for comfort. The measurements you see here are my personal measurements. So what I would do is blend from an 8 at the bust to a 10 at the hips and just omit my waist measurement entirely. If you're a straight size and don't need to do any pattern adjustments, then you're good to cut your pattern pieces. But if you fall in between sizes, as I do, or need to make another adjustment, we'll discuss that now. Making adjustments to your pattern is a really great way to customize your fit, and it does not need to be difficult or overwhelming. Before we get started, here are 5 tips that I have found helpful for students over the past 10 years of helping people make their own clothes. Number 1, start with a muslin. I always recommend making a muslin or test garment before making any pattern alterations. This way you aren't guessing at what you'll need to adjust, but you can pinpoint exactly what is working and what might need to be fixed. Number 2, only make one pattern adjustment at a time. We get questions all the time that go something like this. I can't get the fit down on a pattern. I've done X, Y, and Z adjustments. Which one is causing this new problem? Unfortunately, I can't tell, and there's no way to isolate the issue because 3 adjustments were done all at once. So if you're looking to do multiple pattern adjustments, start with just one. Then add only after you get the previous adjustment looking great. 3. Once you get your initial adjustment looking good and you're ready to move on to the next one, if you're doing more than one, trace off a new pattern piece and make the adjustment to the new piece. That way, if it turns out you didn't need the adjustment, you can easily step back to the pattern previous to the adjustment rather than trying to undo your adjustment on that pattern piece. Number 4, the general order of adjustments that I recommend is 1, start with any blending between sizes. 2, then do length adjustments. 3, bust adjustments come next. And 4, anything else you feel like you might need. My 5th and final tip is don't forget that you can always measure any point on your body and compare that to the pattern. Not sure if the shoulders are going to be too wide or too narrow? Measure your shoulders and then measure the pattern. In the same way that we use body measurements to draft the pattern, you can use your own measurements to check the fit before you even start. All right, now let's talk specific pattern adjustments. If you need to blend between sizes, it's easy to do. Say you're blending from a size 8 bust to a 10 hip. You'll want to blend between the bust and the hip around the waist area rather than from the bust to the hip, because you don't want to affect the measurements at those points, just the area in between them. I use this metal pattern making ruler for my blending. It's called a variform curve. What I do is first I just draw a little circle on the size 8 line. Then I go down to the 10, just so I make sure I'm blending from the right places. Usually I use a pencil, but so you can see it, I'm using a blue pen. So you're just gonna align the ruler from the 8 to the 10 and draw a line. Now, as you practice blending and using the curve, you'll be able to line it up quickly, but if it takes you a few tries to get it right, don't worry about it. So that's all there is to it. We've now gone from an 8 to a 10. You'll want to make the same blending adjustment to any pattern pieces that cross the point where you blended or that align to the blended piece. That means if you blend across the waist, like we did on the front, you'll also need to make the same adjustment to the back. So again, find your 8, your 10, align your ruler, and draw. For pieces that only attach to the garment above or below the blending point, you'll use the size that they're attaching to. So for the archer, we'll be cutting a size 8 sleeve, a size 8 yoke, and a size 8 collar stand and collar. Anything that attaches below, we would be using a size 10. So in this case, if we were making view B, we would use the lower back piece in a size 10. Lengthening and shortening your pattern pieces is pretty straightforward. There are 2 main places that you'll want to lengthen or shorten your pattern, at the waist and at the hem. To lengthen through the bodice, start by locating the pattern pieces you need to adjust. I'll be starting with the front here, but just keep in mind anything that cuts through the waist here, where I'll be lengthening, you'll need to adjust. So that would be the front button band, the other front, and the back. So to begin, you can just cut along the length and shorten line. And then tape this down to a piece of paper underneath the pattern. I'm going to lengthen by 1 inch. So all you have to do is measure out 1 inch here. And then also extend the grain line so you can make sure that you're aligning the lower half properly again. Simply align the bottom part that you cut off. You can see here it's aligned with the 1 inch line and the grain line is in line, and then trace that down. Sorry, tape that down. Now, here where there's a jag, you'll need to reblend the side seam. So all you have to do is take your ruler, Draw across there, connecting the two lines, and then again here at the front. You'll then cut out your pattern and you're good to go. If you're shortening your pattern, the same steps apply, only rather than spreading the pieces apart, you'll be overlapping them the amount you need to shorten the pattern. So if we were to shorten this pattern by 1 inch, we would again take our ruler, draw 1 inch, align your bottom half, front and side seam and the grain line are all aligned. And now you'll notice a small jag in the side seam here. So again, all we would have to do is take our ruler and reblend. And that's how you shorten. Now if you wanted to shorten just the hem, all you'd have to do is decide how much you're going to lengthen the hem. So if we wanted to do 3/4 of an inch, all you do is you just take your ruler and you just go along the hem and add 3/4 of an inch. Let me find my 10 just to make sure I'm doing the right thing here. One thing that I find helpful when working with a pattern with multiple sizes is to highlight my base size. That way I always can find it easily. I'm not cutting the wrong thing. It's just an easy trick that I like. So here we are over at the side. And then we'll just extend the side seam down following the existing line. So this, and then, sorry, do the center front as well. And this would be your new hem. So you would again do this to the back piece. If you're making view B of the archer and you want to raise or lower the point where the back gathers hit, it's very similar to lengthening and shortening the bodice. Start by deciding how much you want to raise or lower the gathering. So in this case, I'm going to raise it 3/4 of an inch. To raise the gathered panel, the first thing I'm going to do is cut along the length and shorten line. And again, this is the waistline. And if I want to raise it 3/4 of an inch, I'm just going to come in here and draw a line for 3/4. So now I'm just going to align the piece I just cut off with the line I drew. Make sure that the center back and the grain line are aligned. The side seam will jag because we're raising the pattern. And tape that in place. Now we will need to reblend our side seam because you can see here there's a slight jag, and since I'm going from an 8 to a 10, I'll blend that now as well. So you just draw your new line. And that is part 1. So now that we've raised this 3/4 of an inch, we're going to need to add that 3/4 of an inch back into the length here. Otherwise the side seam won't meet. So what I do, it's very easy. I just draw a line across, cut, and then place a piece of paper underneath. Tape 1/2. Then you want to add your 3/4 of an inch. extend the center back so you can make sure that you're properly aligned. And realign the top. Tape that in place. And we'll redraw our side seam. And this will be a straight 10 because we blended above this point. So now you would just cut around your two pieces, and we have adjusted the point where the back panel hits. If you want to lower the point where the back panel hits, you would do these steps but in reverse. These would spread, these would overlap. Lengthening or shortening the sleeve is essentially the same as the body, but I want to touch on one point quickly. When shortening the sleeve, you want to shorten from the elbow area along the lengthen or shorten line, rather than from the hem. You can see all these important markings. We have pleats, we have a cut line for the sleeve placket. If you just shorten, you'll cut off all of that. It's just easier to do it from here. So same as the other pieces we went over, to lengthen, spread, to shorten, overlap. All right, now let's talk about bust adjustments. The Archer currently only comes in our 0 to 18 B cup range, though we are in the process of drafting it for our new 14 through 30 D cup range now. If you've ever researched bust adjustments, you know there are a few ways to achieve them. Here I'm going to show you the method that we use in the studio. Before we start though, just a quick note about cup size. We're referring to sewing cup size, not bra cup size. Sewing cup size is determined by subtracting your upper bust measurement from your lower bust measurement, while bra size also takes the underbust into account. This means your sewing cup and bra cup sizes can and most likely will differ. The first thing you need to do before you start any bust adjustment is to figure out what sort of an adjustment you'll need, if any. To do this, we're going to need our full bust measurement, which we took earlier in this video, as well as our upper bust measurement. To take your upper bust measurement, place the tape measure around your body just under the armpits. It will lay over your bust and go around your shoulder blades. The tape measure may angle upwards slightly at the bust. That's fine. You just want to make sure it's above the bust. Take that measurement and record it. Subtract your upper bust from your full bust. If the number you get differs from the measurement associated with our B cup, which is a 2-inch difference, then you might need to make an adjustment. You can see here in this chart what measurements correspond to which sewing cup size. In the case of the B cup, there's a 2-inch difference between the upper bust and full bust. If you're over the 2 inches, you'll need a full bust adjustment, under a small. For example, with a full bust of 40 inches and an upper bust of 36, you'd subtract 36 from 40 to get 4 inches, which would require a full bust adjustment. Now that we've established what sort of adjustment we're going to make, we need to calculate the amount we're going to add or subtract from your pattern. Take your number, in our case 4 inches, and subtract 2 inches from it to get the full amount of your bust adjustment. Subtracting the 2 inches comes from the fact that the pattern is drafted for a B cup, which is a 2-inch difference. Since this amount is already drafted into the pattern, you're just adding the additional amount on top of what already exists. You would then divide the full amount of the adjustment in half, 2 inches, so you would be doing a 1-inch adjustment on each side of the pattern. If you have a number that's less than 2 inches, you're still going to divide it in half. So say we had a 1-inch difference, we'll divide that by 2 to get 1/2 inch. That's the amount you'll subtract while doing your small bust adjustment. And the reason that we're dividing the amount in half is because when you're working with a pattern, you're only working with 1/2 of the garment at a time. If you apply the full amount, you're actually doubling it between the two sides. I'll now walk you through a full bust adjustment using the 2 inches from our example math. To begin, you're going to need to find the apex of your bust and apply that to the pattern. It's important that you make this adjustment based on your specific bust apex because everyone's falls in a different place. You want the space that we're adding for your bust to actually fall at your bust. If you've made a muslin, you can mark it on there and then transfer it to your pattern. Or you can do one of the following two things. You can cut a front from muslin and hold it up to your body, marking your bust apex, then transfer that to the pattern. You can alternately measure down from your shoulder-neck intersection, also known as the high point of shoulder, to your bust apex. Then measure your apex to center front. So I have 11 and 4 1/4. After you've measured your apex, we need to transfer the marking to our pattern. So take your ruler and a pen or pencil, and then you're just going to mark down the amount. Mine was 11, and then over, mine was 4 1/4. So here we have my apex. Once you've marked your apex, draw a vertical line from the apex to the hemline of the pattern. Make sure to keep the line parallel to the grain line and label this line 1. From there, draw a line from the apex to the armscye. You'll want this line to measure approximately 1/3 of the way around the total armhole, starting at the underarm intersection. This is not a hard and fast rule. It's more of a general guideline. It's just something that we found works well. But if there's a point that you find works well for you, by all means stick with what's working. You're going to label this line 2. Next, you're going to draw a line from the apex out to the side seam, and you want that perpendicular to the grain line. This is line 3. Finally, you'll need to draw a line through the body of the garment. We're using the length and shorten line here because it runs through the pattern without affecting the alignment of the view B back panel placement. Label this line 4. One more thing I want to do is just come up to line 2 and mark where the 1/2 inch seam allowance is along that line. These are the 4 lines that will create your bust adjustment. Now we're going to start cutting, but before we do that, I just like to place a piece of paper under my pattern. That way I'm not moving a hinged piece of paper later on. So, to begin, we're going to slash through the hemline along line 1 up to the apex. When you get to the apex, we're going to pivot along line 2 and cut just to the point we marked for the seam allowance. Then come back through to the armscye and cut from the armscye to, but not through, that seam allowance point. We want this to remain hinged. So now you can see the 2 pieces are just hinged right on that little seam allowance mark right there. Now, cut along line 3 from the side seam to the apex. Again, to, but not through. We need a hinge there as well. There you can see everything's hinged. We're ready for our next step. So all the steps up to this point are the same, whether you're doing a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment. So from this point on, I'll be doing a full bust adjustment. We're now going to open this vertical slit the amount of our bust adjustment. So an easy way to do that, make sure it remains parallel, is to just align your ruler and draw a 1 inch line over from the center panel. Now, gently align that. These 2 pieces should be laying flat. And then I like to weight that down. The movement of swinging this panel out has created the dart that we're looking for. You'll also notice that when we move the side out, the side panel becomes longer than the center panel. This is an easy fix. We're just going to cut along line 4. And then line 4 on the side panel. We're just going to extend that out. And then also extend the grain line so we can make sure we're keeping things properly aligned. And just realign this piece. Now you can see it's aligned here at the center front and aligned at the hem. At this point, I trace this off onto the new sheet of paper so that I'm not working with a big taped up mess. Now remove the hinged pattern, and you can see what we're working with. To begin, I want to first close up the center front and the hem. So just align your ruler and connect those. Now, in forming this adjustment, we created this dart, and we now need to address that. To form our dart, start by finding the center of the two dart legs. Place a point there and draw a line from the apex through that point. Now, we're going to need to back the dart off a bit because right now the point of the dart is sitting right at your apex, and that's not going to lay very well. So on a B cup, you'd maybe move it back about a ½ inch. On a D cup, maybe a full inch. You're going to want to make a muslin and try this on. There's no hard and fast rule. So I'm going to back the dart off by 1 inch, and this becomes your new dart point. So connect this point to the outer point of the dart leg at the side seam, and this is your new dart. Now we need to fold the dart so that we can create this angled edge here. To do that, I like to start by scoring the bottom leg and the center. I score this with an awl. And you're going to want to bring the bottom leg up so that way the dart take up falls towards the hem. Now you can do this flat, or a little trick. If you have a corner of your table or a box or something, align your pattern so your dart point is at the corner of the box, and then just fold it, and it lays pretty nice that way. It's a little easier. We now need to transfer the side seam to the dart take up underneath. So you can do this using a needlepoint tracer. Just trace along and it'll transfer to the layers underneath, or you can just cut right through that. So now you can see when we unfold, this is the new angled edge. And when you fold this, this will lay flush with the side seam. Now, depending on the size of your dart, you may need to reblend the arm side a tiny bit. You can see here how it kind of comes down to a point and angles over. That's from being hinged up. So all you need to do is take your curve, get in there, and just reblend. And this just keeps the armhole smooth and it doesn't pull in that area. So after you do that, you are free to cut your pattern piece out. Okay, so here we are back at the point where we diverged for the full bust adjustment, and we're going to now do a small bust adjustment. So you have your pattern piece, it's cut. We'll now close the vertical slit the amount of our small bust adjustment, which is a ½ inch. You can see I measured that out here. So we're just going to gently take the hinged pieces and bring them over so that they align with the line we just drew. You're going to make sure that these two edges remain parallel. And notice that we're also not creating a dart here. We're actually overlapping, and this is what's taking the room out of the bodice. When we move the side panel in, it becomes shorter than the center panel. So we need to adjust that now. Find your scissors and just cut here. Bring the pattern down so it hits, and you're just aligning it with this line here. and then I'll put a little tape in there. So this is our adjustment. No dart is created, so we don't need to do anything with that. At this point, you're going to trace the pattern off onto your paper. The first thing we want to do is close up the side seam right there. And even though there's no dart created, we do still have a bit of a pitch in where we overlap the two pieces. So I like to come in with my ruler and just blend that a little bit. That way you have a nice smooth side seam. And finally, opposite to the full bust adjustment where we had a dip in, we now have a small dip out at the arm side. This is not a big deal, but I just like to come in and blend it. So that is a small bust adjustment, and you can now cut out your pattern piece. Now the final step in our bust adjustment is to adjust the length of any piece that sews to something we adjusted on the front. So that will be the back and the button band. So simply do what we did when we were lengthening and shortening in the beginning of this video. You're going to cut along here, and you're either going to spread or overlap the pattern so that your side seams match. And same for the front, although the button band is easier. You can just add on or subtract from the hem because it doesn't matter. There's no real fit. It's a rectangle. So whatever you feel works best for you is what you're going to do. So that's it for today's lesson. I hope this information helps you make a more informed decision on choosing a size and clarify some of the most common pattern adjustments. Get your pattern ready because in our next video we'll be cutting our fabric. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to help out. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our latest posts, and I'll see you back here next time. Bye!